Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Green Group webinar on high energy prices from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Thanks to all of those who are joining us live. In the studio with me are two guests. We have Bas Eickhout, President of the Green EFA Group, and we have Marie Toussaint, Head of Delegation for the French delegation of the Greens. Joining us online, we're very glad also to have Anthony Frogart, the Senior Director for Aviation, Shipping and Energy from the NGO Transport and Environment. And we'll hear from him in a few minutes around new research on the costs and profits that we expect to see if this energy crisis continues. But first, we're going to go to Bas and Marie on some of the more obvious questions that we should ask for our general audience. Why are the energy prices so high right now?
Maybe you start, Marie?
As you want. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for welcoming us. And hello to everyone who is online. Well, the prices are high. We could say it's because of Trump, because he went around attacking everyone. I'm picking your own words, Simon, offline. But and then he made the prices explode. But I think the core issue there is that the EU is still so much dependent on fossil fuels that we don't produce. We import around 90% both of oil and gas. And this is making life really, really expensive when the world is going chaotic. So the only solution really is to go towards, energy sovereignty, energy autonomy, thus renewables, of course.
Bas, who's benefiting?
Well, in the end, I don't think the world is benefiting at all, right? I mean, fossil fuels are bad for the environment. They are bad for our wallets. The vulnerability is making us unsafe. And we already have seen, of course, already a couple of years ago, we had a first energy crisis in this century when Russia was invading and having a full-scale war on Ukraine. Also, that was the moment gas prices were skyrocketing. And everyone was paying for that, apart from one set of companies, and those are the fossil companies. They had record profits, and we see that happening now again. So it's really painful to see that those companies who have been lobbying for decades against climate policies, Europe listening to them, making ourselves more and more dependent of fossil fuels, our economies, as Marie already said, fully dependent on that. And now we see the price we are paying for that, the wars that are raging and the people that are suffering from that, and who is profiting. The same fossil fuel companies are making now skyrocket profits again. And I'm sure Anthony will get to that. But the first indications, and we've seen it already, all the profits that the fossil fuel companies are making are breaking new records again. So, and that is, of course, a crazy situation where this is not only a tremendous war, which is impacting a lot of people. This is bad for the environment, our dependency on climate. But you also see that there is a massive divide where the poor are now paying for the few that are already making a lot of money, being the fossil companies. So this is a problem that has many, many sides that we need to address.
If we had this same problem a few years ago at the start of the Ukraine war, why didn't we learn from those mistakes from the past, especially now with the Green Deal under attack? Like, what's happening politically that we're not further down the line when it comes to renewables? And
I think there's one issue that Bas addressed quickly that I'd like to really get on, is the work, the lobbying that they have been developing for years, for decades. And if you think about what happened in the European Union already in the 80s, 90s, the European Union was beginning to look at climate and CO2 emissions, and they said, okay, let's have a carbon tax at that moment. And of course, you saw the big lobbying of the fossil fuel industry to prevent this shift towards a more climate-friendly policy. And that's exactly what we've seen. When the war in Ukraine began, we had the feeling that Europe was heading towards more sovereignty. And there was this speech about, let's reduce gas consumption, let's move towards renewables. And then it went away quite easily, because after a few months only, they talked about diversification of sourcing of where the oil and gas come from. And this is also what led Ursula von der Leyen to sign this crazy 750 billion agreement on gas with Donald Trump himself before he began to bomb everyone. And this is really the context in which we are living right now. And I could even go back further, because they have worked a lot also from the 60s onwards to fight against the ideas on climate change and to fight against science. So we can see they have a huge power grasp that allows, for instance, Total to make 50% more of profits compared to last year. And we know also that the prices today are higher than before the crisis in Ukraine, because it went up and then it went down, but not down enough. So it's just going like this and going higher and higher, and the profits as well.
But can I just say that I mean, the idea was, of course, that there was no reaction in Europe, but the reaction to the Russian invasion on Ukraine was massively getting rid of the fossil fuel dependency of Russia, which at that moment was a logical thing to do, right? I mean, look at Germany, and Germany in 1 year time made tremendous steps in being less dependent of Russian gas. And I think that shift, all the modelers, right, they always look at the inertia in the system and they say you can never move that fast away. What Germany did in 1 year time is massive. And there you also have to compliment the German Greens who were in that government, who made a massive shift. The problem, however, was that the first step was, okay, let's go away from Russian gas. Then we had all these LNG terminals. So we changed our dependency to other gas, which at that moment maybe was logical because your economy is built on gas. But then, of course, the second step should have been, while we're doing that, we should make our entire economy less dependent of gas. And that was the Green Deal. And that's where you saw that the people were getting a bit like, okay, now we've done this one, we stepped away from Russia. Let's not now take the step of the Green Deal because that's too cumbersome. And that is the problem. We never went to the second step, and that is going away from all the fossil fuels. And that's the price we're paying now.
Thanks, Bas, and thanks, Marie, for that first segment. I think now is a good time to bring in Anthony. So we have Anthony Froggatt on the line. He's Senior Director for Aviation, Shipping and Energy at the NGO Transport and Environment. Anthony, you have a small presentation for us on some facts and figures around the current crisis that we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I hope it really builds what's been said already. I mean, the key thing is, as has been said, the profits of the fossil fuel industry have increased hugely. There was a recent study produced by Global Witness that talked about the 6 leading oil majors increasing profits by around 43%, so an additional $22 billion since in the first quarter of this year. We also see some increases in terms of can you hear me okay?
I think we can, yeah. I think it's okay.
I'm getting a huge amount of background. Sorry. There's some, anyway, I'll keep going. So we're seeing increased profits from the oil sector. Who's paying for this? This is one of the key questions. And already we've seen the European Commission saying that there has been huge increases in the total import bill for fossil fuels. So again, so far since the start of the war, there's been an estimated 24 billion euros of additional oil and gas bills in terms of what we're paying to increase. Likewise, in America, we're seeing around $40 billion of excess costs for consumers in the oil sector. So different regions, we're seeing consumers paying much more for their energy. We're seeing governments having to pay much more in terms of their import bill, and we're seeing the fossil fuel industry getting more and more profits. And this is what we saw in 2022. We saw huge increases in profits. So it's estimated in 2022 that the European fossil fuel sector, their company profits were in excess of 100 billion. And there's no reason to think that if this current situation continues, that we won't see similar levels of additional profit from the industry. And then maybe the final point to mention is that governments have had to respond to this. And so what they have done in the past is they've given energy subsidies, and those energy subsidies haven't been targeted. And so in 2022, we saw the fossil fuel industry actually getting additional subsidies from EU governments to enable them to continue to consume fossil fuels. And I would argue that one of the key things that we need to learn from the past is if governments do support energy consumers, they need to do that in a very targeted way. And maybe to give an example, what we have now, and I think was different from 2022, was that there is EVs have come of age in many ways. They are a comparable price, they are widely available, and they are the quickest way in which we can reduce oil consumption. But if we accelerate the deployment of EVs, that helps us in terms of reducing our fossil fuel bill, reducing the impacts of climate change, and helping to improve our energy security. So rather than supporting consumers to continue to use oil, we should target that towards accelerating the deployment of EVs.
Many thanks for that, Anthony, and apologies if we had some feedback on the line. We'll see if we can try to sort it out. Reactions. I mean, I think it's the same, very much the same line we've already been talking about. Billions extra for costs for consumers, billions extra for governments, and no end in sight, really, in a stalemate in the Strait of Hormuz. So what are the next steps? What can we do?
Well, in the end, politics can do a lot, right? And there I have to say that the Commission until now, the European Commission has said until now, we are not going to address that problem of these excessive profits, because that's what we're talking about, right? These are excessive profits that fossil fuel companies are making. I mean, that they're always making profits, we know, but at this stage, they are having record high profits on top of a crisis where people are paying a massive bill. So, and there you can, of course, do something. You can raise a tax on those excessive profits. We call it a Trump tax because it's kind of an excessive profit that has been caused by this war in Iran. And not surprisingly, also a lot of American fossil companies are profiting from it. And of course, by raising the tax on excessive profits, then of course the revenues from that you need to use for those people who are really desperately in need of it. And that is the other part of it. It's such a unfair system that those who now really are having problems in making the ends meet at the end of the day are paying the price for the CEOs of, and probably more the shareholders of the fossil fuel companies. And that is the biggest problem, which, of course, on the short term, you can do something about. What Anthony was saying on the longer term, midterm, absolutely, we need to get away. And that's also what Marie said. We need to get away from the fossil dependency. But on the short term, we need to tackle this massive excessive profits that companies are making, fossil fuel companies are making, and use the revenues to compensate, targeted to people that really need it.
If we talk a little bit about the brackets, the people who are really suffering from these sort of energy bills, Marie, you've done a lot of work around the cost of living crisis. What would be your message for people watching or people in Europe who are seeing maybe Europe not act as swiftly as they could for bills in pockets?
Well, I think what Bas said is important. We can act. We actually can act. So if I have to talk to the people, I want to tell them, don't lose hope, but you have to make this step that you shouldn't have to make, but you have to make this step and go and talk to your leaders, to the deciders, try to reach out to the Commission online, I don't know, but to tell them to do something. But I want to insist on the fact that this explosion of the prices of energy is really bad for like the most vulnerable, the people already in situation of poverty or at risk of poverty. But it's painful for all range of European citizens. And there is something that needs to be done because, I mean, we'll have more and more people at risk of poverty than we have today if we don't act and if we don't do anything. I mean, when you have to go to work and you have to take your car and it's €2 the liter, then, I mean, it's crazy. And then, of course, you run from a station to another station. That's just really awful. It's a nightmare for the people. And there was an analysis also, an estimation of how much it will cost to the people who still live in a house with gas. And it's almost 2,000 euros more per year. So if we don't do anything, it's going to be 2,000 euros less in the pockets of the people. And I mean, compared to those excessive profits that we have. So we really need to do something. We need to get rid of the fossil fuel dependence. That's really something that should, stay there. But yes, we do need this quick reaction. And for this, unfortunately, we yell as much as we can from within the European Parliament when we talk to the Commission and so on. But there needs to be a bigger mobilization, I would say.
If people are getting ready now for their summer holidays and visiting family and friends, Bas, over the next few months, what would be your advice for them if they are facing extra costs?
But that's a difficult one, right? I mean,
everyone, yeah.
Yeah, for everyone. I mean, everyone is suffering from this. And as long as we as politicians are not acting accordingly, then of course people will suffer from that also towards their summer breaks, because the modes of transport will get very expensive. And of course, we can then say, yeah, but we need to build a society that is less dependent on fossils. We need to go indeed to the alternatives, that is electrification, because then you can rely on the alternatives that we are producing ourselves, and then you're not so much dependent of a crazy guy in Washington who is invading an oil region like the Middle East. I mean, all that we know. But as long as politicians are not acting upon it, then the message to people is that towards the summer, all the traveling options will get more expensive, and that's exactly what we're seeing. And I really think here the Commission, the European Commission, but also the countries who are now all pointing at each other, right? We are having a bit of a classic way where countries are saying, yeah, we might do something with a tax, but it should come from Europe. And Europe is saying, well, we're not going to do it, but hey, countries, you can do it. So we're pointing at each other. Mm-hmm. Well, there's one thing for sure, that is not helping anyone. And I do think the European Commission can overcome this by taking a step, and then that countries will have to take their step, because now just pointing at each other on who's doing the action is not helping anyone.
So what's a bit crazy is that they're managing also to point the fingers at the Green Deal as at the transition, saying that it is what costs more, but it's actually the total other way around. I mean, getting rid of fossil fuels is good for sovereignty, is good for the climate, is good for the cost of living. I mean, it's lowering the cost of living. So it's really essential. And when we say this money can be used to help the people, the most vulnerable, but not only, all those who suffer from the high energy prices. And we talk about holiday. I mean, we have to acknowledge the fact that I don't know the European numbers, but for instance, in France, it's more than 1 out of 5 people that can't go in holiday anyhow. But we could maybe use this money to help people going in holidays. So we can develop programs for people to be able to go in holidays. Like, there is no fatality in this. We can really act. And I think that's really what people need to take home, even if on the webinar you're home, most of the time.
I come back on that Green Deal point because we've seen it take an absolute hammering over the last 2 years. So we have the short term, it's going to be a hard summer, we know that, but long term, do you see a way back for what we really advocated for the last mandate, a strong Green Deal, a quicker transition, zero fossil fuels in Europe? Where does that future, that very green future, where does that stand now, even in the face of such a crisis?
Well, I think you see in some countries that the debate is coming back there, right? Which makes it even more painful, because we were on a certain track, making ourselves less dependent of fossils. Then the conservatives, let's say, also call a spade a spade. The conservatives were attacking the Green Deal and are now kind of, oh, we have a problem now with the fossil fuel price and let's compensate. That's kind of, they open up the tap and they're now trying to clean up the water while the tap is still full open. So you do see some of the conservatives coming back like, yeah, maybe we should now accelerate our energy transition. But the problem is, if every 2 years we are changing course, and sorry to say, but the conservatives are doing that, they called the Green Deal the man on the moon project of Europe in 2019. Just imagine that JFK after 2 years would have said with the man on the moon project, forget about it. Then the Americans would never have reached the moon. You need to keep the course. You need to stay on it, and don't change it immediately the moment there is some resistance from farmers, because that's where it started quite often. Sorry, but the conservatives and their zigzag course, and they're not staying the course, is the biggest problem that we're seeing. Fortunately, some are now coming back again. But for example, in Italy, Meloni is still pretending that it's the Green Deal that is the problem, where it's her fossil fuel dependency that is the problem.
We have a few questions coming in, but Marie, did you want to come in on any last point there before I go?
But I agree. And maybe what I want to add also to your question, because I was like, of course, there's going to be a moment where the green agenda will come back. And I want to tell, especially to the youngest who are online with us, that, maybe you became a teenager, an adult, at the moment where climate was really high on the agenda. But what we're living right now, we have already lived before. I mean, 10 years ago, it was so awful to talk about climate, and we were also called bad names. And I mean, we had less far right in the governments all throughout the planet, but still we had to fight like hell. And we did manage to make climate really the big issue and to get the Green Deal. So it can come back. We just need to be patient, hardworking, and not to let it go.
Okay, thanks for that. We have a few questions, and apologies again if there were sound issues. Does someone consider a European €9 ticket? I think it might relate to trains. What's our view on that from the Green side?
We're very much in favor. Yeah, that's
€9 to go anywhere?
Well, we need to sort out the exact price. But I mean, we've seen in a couple of countries where there were climat tickets and all that, and that has become very successful. It helped people in getting on alternative transports. It made public transport more accessible, and it was, of course, also better for the environment and using less of the fossil dependency. So, yeah, if we can do something with that at the European level, why not? Probably it's easier to arrange it at the national level. But I'm happy that now in some of the countries you are seeing that debate, because I think it's a good, we've seen some good examples there, absolutely.
And also they're always hugely popular measures. I always wonder why more countries don't do it. It's always popular if you reduce train travel. Why are lobbies so powerful? Do they buy politicians in Europe?
Most certainly, but there are many ways to buy politicians, actually. So I don't want to be accused of saying false things, of defamation or whatever. But I mean, of course, we have corrupt. I mean, we remember the Qatargate not such a long time ago in the European Parliament, and Qatar, of course, want to sell its gas and oil. So this is one issue that is still going on. But this is a country. This is not exactly a lobby, although you have some state oil company as well. But of course, they spend billions in trying to influence the policy making in Europe. So they have those billions to influence the policy making. They actually buy some. I told you about putting in doubt the science, and they buy articles, seemingly scientific articles, to say that climate change is not going that fast. I mean, over the time, we had the same on asbestos, on toxic rain, on a lot of issues. But when it comes to pollution, they try to install the doubt. So we have this Merchant of Doubts book that is quite famous and really an investigation, serious one, into their tactics. So this is also something that they're doing. And it goes through, different ways. But they also they also are providers of economic euros, of money, and they also are providers of jobs. So they tend to do chantage, blackmail. They also blackmail, and we can see that from France with Total Energy, which is one of the biggest one in Europe, if not the biggest one, the most capitalized at least. And the CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, is always saying, if you tax me, I will move my headquarters to the US. And actually, that's what happened in the Netherlands, because Shell already moved out its social seat. So we can see that they're blackmailing. They are using every tool at their disposal. And of course, when you're just a citizen, you don't have access to the same tools.
But let's also be honest, right? Their message is quite simple. They don't want any change. They just want that the economy keeps on running as it is. And we have built a fossil economy. So what they're saying is, we provide a lot of jobs, we provide the economic growth, so don't change, don't rock the boat, and then everything will be fine. But you see on many fronts what a problematic direction this fossil economy has taken, for a security angle, from an economic angle, from a social angle, from a climate angle. So we want to change that. But with that, we are building a new economy. But the new voices are not as powerful as those who are still there. And this is the moment you hear a politician talking about, we need to be technology neutral, we should not do anything. Basically what they're saying is, we want to stay where we are. And that is just listening to the fossil lobby. And it's so much easier to sit and don't change instead of preaching and really fighting for a different economy. So they have an easy message, and conservative politicians are called conservative for that reason. They don't want change. But the price we are all paying.
We are nearly out of time, but I would like to maybe end on a hopeful note if we can. There were some glimmers of hope with the Green Deal maybe coming back in some countries. What is your thing that's keeping you going these days in the face of such crises?
Well, to be very honest, the alternatives are there. And I think that is really what keeps on providing hope, right? I mean, we had the first oil crisis in the 70s, but granted, the alternatives were not there. Now the alternatives are there, and they are economically even more viable than the fossil alternatives. So economically, we can do better. Socially, we can do better because renewables. Why is that a threat to the fossil companies? Not only they could change the technology, right? But the problem is with renewables, you also have a much more power to the people instead of where, as a fossil company, you own the supply and you make everyone dependent of you. That's much more complicated with renewables. So the alternatives are there. It's more social. It's more economic. So, there are positive changes there. But yeah, it's making some fossil companies very nervous. They're fighting it, but in the end, we will win it. The big question is how fast.
Marie, any last words?
When. No, I do have hope in the people, actually. And we can see that transition is also getting a bit lower in the minds of the people. But actually, I truly believe that we can make it right, and that, at some point we will regain the power over these economic machines. And we've already won a few battles that we should never undermine, that we should never disregard. And we have so many others to fight and to win that I really trust that together we can make this change happen.
Very good. So the fight continues here for sure. A big thank you to Marie and a big thank you to Bas.
Thanks
and also
to you.
A very big thank you to Anthony Froggatt from TNE, especially with the sound issues, and appreciate the short notice in joining us this evening. You can find our windfall tax campaign, or the Trump tax as we have dubbed it, on our website, greensefa.eu. And tune in again for more webinars, which we will have in the coming months. Thanks for joining.